All right, folks, the doom in the tomb rages on, and there's been a bit of a blitz of new decks that I want to talk about.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, we've got the early meta shaping up here from the wild format Doom in the Tomb event. Cards are back, Ragnaros, Thorison, Flamewaker, and to no one's surprise, the meta is already starting to shape around all of these powerful new cards. In particular here, I've got 5 new decks from professional players, ladder grinders, deck builders that are already showcasing some really good win rates, high legend placements, and it looks like these could be some of the go-to new meta decks. Now, the data's not completely in. We'll probably do another video in a few days when there's more data to confirm whether these decks are really working or not. But for now, if you want to get a leg up on the competition, these seem like a pretty good start. So up first here, let's talk about Evolve Shaman, a deck that I've already played a little bit. You might have seen a video on the channel already of my version of the list. This one comes from Jombre. A lot of similarities here, utilizing a few key cards, namely Evolve, the new one for the event, with Mutate and Desert Hair and Mogu Flesh Shaper. That's sort of this core Evolve package that's shaping up, because Desert Hair is really good with Evolve, getting 3/4 drops for 4 mana is quite powerful. Mogu Flesh Shaper fits in really nicely there as well. And although I went for a little bit more of a totem route, Jombre here has gone for a little bit more of an overload route with Vicina, Thunderhead, Voltaic Burst, Zap, still letting you go wide on the board so you can play Sea Giants and Mogus while giving you options to buff other things in this deck as well. He still has things from below in there as well, so still some totem stuff happening. Not quite as much as our build, but this one is a little bit more reminiscent of the aggro overload stuff we were seeing before the patch, just with some of this new Evolve package added in. And Jombre's seeing a ton of success with this list. And there's a handful of different varieties of this. My list, Jombre's list, I'm sure his is much better than mine. I've seen a handful of others. They all have the Desert Hair Evolve thing going on. And of course, the Sea Giant Mogu Flesh Shaper thing. So we haven't narrowed in on the perfect complementary package to this core set of cards. But I think it's becoming clear this is gonna be a very powerful archetype in some way in this new meta. So next up here, let's talk about another archetype that's shaping up, and that is a control Nzoth Warlock. Because turns out Nzoth is pretty sweet when you can make extra copies of it with Expired Merchant. And that means Nzoth, the highest cost card in your deck, so as soon as you draw it, you can play your Expired Merchant. It's gonna hit Nzoth. That adds 2 more Nzoths to your hand. Your second Expired Merchant discards another Nzoth. That adds 2 more Nzoths to your hand. So you kind of get 3 total playable Nzoths out of this. And 3 big board reloads like that's really, really good at ending games. Like, control decks can have trouble with that many big plays. And with death rattles like Kartut Defender, Sylvanas Windrunner, and Rotten Apple Bomb in the deck, they're going to be solid minions too, right? This is enough to create pressure, really sticky boards that will either just kill your opponent or deny any sort of aggro deck who can't get through all the healing and the defense of the Kartut Defenders. Now, to complement that kind of core package, No Hands Gamer here, who made this version of the list, has gone for an early game lackey sort of setup, even running Imp Gang Boss as well, one of these new cards, new old cards anyway, and reporting a lot of success with this build. So it still has some early game power. It can curve out, it can do some things, create pressure for your opponent, so that Nzoth serves almost as a pressure finisher as opposed to a purely defensive one. So great mix here of counter pressure, some actual threats on board, control elements. This deck has a little bit of everything going for it, and because of Warlock's hero power, empowering all of this through a really efficient and reliable card draw, it looks like it's going to be a really strong way to play. Now, I've seen some other varieties of this same sort of Nzoth package that look viable as well. Again, I don't know which one's going to end up being the go-to version, but clearly something about Nzoth, Kartut Defender, Sylvanas is working very, very well in Warlock in particular. But it's not just Warlock, it's also Priest, and Res Priest builds like this one are gaining a lot of momentum. They seem to have very strong win rates, lots of high legend plays. Now, they, again, still vary a lot, but the core elements are res cards like Nzoth, Mass Resurrection, even Katrina Muerte, and big death rattles to res. Kartut Defender, Sylvanas Windrunner, and Convincing Infiltrator. Namely, you've also got things like Archmage Vargoth in there for crazy res style plays with your mass res, and Psychopomp even in there too, because Psychopomp's going to work out to bring you back some big stuff. And this list really doesn't have a lot of early game. It's very greedy, very late game oriented, which as I've tried to playtest this on stream, we've shifted away from some of these super greedy versions of the list, adding in a little bit more early game control. But some of these greedy lists are still working because the swings are so enormous when you get them to land. And I can say just resurrecting Kartut Defenders feels so good, and it's really hard for opponents to deal with that. Now, this one does not include the Priest Quest, which I've seen a handful do. I think this one is realizing that it's enough to just play a lot of big stuff and keep resurrecting it. You don't really need more influence than that, and trying to build your deck too much around healing to support the quest can compromise on some of the true stuff you're trying to pull off with resurrects. So this could be another great go-to option for a control deck. I think I like Warlock a little better than Priest right now, but that doesn't mean they both can't succeed with the same kind of game plan. So next up here, let's take a look at Tempo Mage list from really the reigning Mage expert APX Void. Most people consider him the best Mage player in the world. And he's got a couple different lists floating around. One that's a little bit bigger than this one that runs a slightly more mid to late game package. But I'm a fan of this really fast version that just has a lot of cheap spells and Flamewaker, Sorcerer's Apprentice shenanigans. This list looks fairly similar to the one that we were playing as well. You might have already seen my video on that. It doesn't have things like Antonitis in there, but does have a Frost Nova, which is kind of cool just to lock down boards. Banana Buffoon makes a lot of sense. And Witchwood Piper is a really cool idea for a deck like this. I think that's great to help you find the most key minions in your deck, which are Sorcerer's Apprentices and Flamewakers. Now, I will admit that having Buffoon and Luna probably reduces the effectiveness of your Piper a little bit, but that's okay. I guess Thalnos does the same thing in here, but it still is adding ways to find minions when a deck that's all spells otherwise. That's a really powerful tool, so I like that tech a lot. And the game plan here, of course, is just acquire a lot of spells, reduce the cost, play them all at once, and blow up your opponent with your Flamewakers, and then reload with Mana Cyclones as needed. Sometimes you don't need to reload, other times you can. So even though you burn through resources quickly, Mana Cyclones mean you kind of like double the value of all your cards, and you can still play for mid to late game scenarios as well via the Mana Cyclone generated cards, which are, usually slightly higher cost than the things that you run in the deck naturally. So this feels very good when it works. I think it still has some consistency issues, but man, it can swing games so hard and just end game so quickly that I suspect this will be a viable archetype. And then finally here, one last deck that surprises me. This is a new Taunt Warrior build from Dizdai, and this was played like to top 5 legend. It is kind of a mid-range, almost pseudo-aggressive or tempo deck in a way, a little bit like the aggro warrior builds that we were playing earlier on in this expansion that run a lot of taunts and Into the Fray, and of course Armageddillo to buff those taunts. Namely, Bloodhoof Brave is probably the inspiration for this deck because it is another great aggressively minded mid-game taunt, which is something that sort of deck needed. So Bloodhoof Brave gives you a reason to do this. Now, also to complement that is Varian Wryn and Ragnaros, which is just a great mid-range minion. Varian Wryn can help you just pull out taunts, so it makes your Varian relevant immediately, which can otherwise be sort of risky if you play Varian and it doesn't really do anything other than just put stats into play. Taunts means you're forcing the action through that play a little bit more, and it can just help you draw cards, which is nice for a deck like this that needs to keep reloading to help end and finish the game. So a nice little hybrid taunt mid-range build, some control elements, some aggression is possible as well, and it's very, very good and efficient list. So I'm excited to see this one shape up. I have a feeling this will sort of fall to the wayside, get forgotten, probably won't really be an archetype that sticks, but will likely be a viable option against Highlander or more, formal, all-in aggressive style warriors. So I will be keeping an eye on this one and probably playing this a fair bit. And there you go, folks. Those are 5 decks to try right now. Seem to be working really well. If you have a deck that's working out for you, feel free to share that in the comments below. But until then, thanks much for watching. And until next time, game on.